transcripts, national testing versus evaluations, planning from behind and planning out your school year, and all of the like technical things that you have to do that to satisfy expectations from the state. And I won't be going over state by state, but I do want to point you in the right direction on where to find the resources for what you're looking for depending on your state. Now, as always, I am not an attorney. This is not legal advice, but I do want to point you in the right direction of where to find what you're looking for. So let's jump right in. Okay, in the United States, homeschooling technically falls under the umbrella of private schools. So we have public schools and then we have private schools. Now, a lot of people are like, well, my child goes to a charter school. My friends, that falls under public schooling. Now, granted, charter schools do have a little bit more flexibility than the public school, but they still fall under public schooling laws. Why? Because they are funded by the state, whereas private schools and homeschools are not funded by the state. And so if you go to the U.S. Department of Education website, they have a full PDF about private school laws. And as you scroll through that, you'll see that it'll say it's divided up by state, and it'll say the state name, and then it'll say private school expectations, and then it goes over homeschooling expectations because technically it falls under private school laws. They're just slightly different than private schools, but that's technically kind of the umbrella that homeschooling falls under. So on my website, school2homeschool.com, that's school2homeschool.com, at the top it says, I have, the different tabs. At the top, it says homeschool laws by state. If you click on that, there's a place where it takes you to two different buttons. One button is the U.S. Department of Education laws by state. And then when you click on that, it'll take you to the U.S. Department of Education website. And then you can click on what your state is and find out the expectations for homeschoolers in your state. Or there's also a green button that says state regulations of private schools and homeschool. If you click on that, that's the PDF that you can print out and use as a resource. And again, that's from the U.S. Department of Education. That's not something that I put together. That's something from the U.S. Department of Education. And each state has different laws governing what their expectations are for homeschooling. Now, I forewarn you, some states are really, really strict, which stinks because you have to jump through all these hoops. And other states are very lenient and you don't really have to do anything with the state. And then you've got everything in between. Now, the state that I happen to be in Colorado, we're somewhere in the middle. We're not super strict. They're not super lenient. It's somewhere in the middle. As far as my state goes, you have three options to homeschool. If you are a certified teacher like I am, you don't have to do anything. Except for just teach your child. You don't have to do state testing or evaluations or submit notices of intent to school districts or anything like that. I choose to just because it just makes the school district bugging me less likely to happen. Even though legally I don't have to submit anything to the state, I still do. And I still do evaluations for my kids because I like to see where they're at. The second option in the state of Colorado, again, for example, the second option parents have is to go under an umbrella school, and that technically counts as like a private school, even though the parent is doing everything, and they keep records and things like that. And then the third option is to submit what's called a notice of intent to a school district. And then on the odd years of schooling, starting with third grade, fifth grade, seventh grade, ninth grade, 11th grade, the child either does national testing and submits that to the school district, or they do state testing. Evaluations, which are you have an evaluator, you find an evaluator, they evaluate your child, and then you send their report to the school district, which is what I've done, both national testing and I've done evaluations with my kids. I actually prefer the evaluator because then my kids get to share what they've learned and have been learning. And we haven't talked about this a lot yet, we will in a future podcast, but because we are what's called relaxed homeschoolers, meaning we do some specific not necessarily curriculums, but I expect my kids to learn reading, writing, and math. And then beyond that, I let them have the flexibility, and we almost unschool beyond that. And that's why we're not pure unschoolers, because I do have certain expectations of my kids. So an evaluator is great because then they can talk to my kids and have talked to my kids and to learn about what the kids have learned about in their different projects. Some parents like to see where their kids are compared to other students, and so they go the national testing route. A couple of national tests that are very popular are the CAT test, the California Achievement Test, and the ITBS test, which are the Iowa Test of Basic Skills. I took the ITBS test as a kid, but my kids have never taken the ITBS test. We have done the California Achievement Test, which was fine. It just took a really long time. And I found that the evaluator for us was more valuable because then my kids could express to somebody and share with them verbally and as well as like show them some of the cool things that they've done or played songs that they've learned or different things with an evaluator, which they prefer as well. So you've got a couple options. But it depends from state to state what your requirements are. In some states, the parents can write the diploma. In other states, a child is not allowed to have a diploma from a parent. Might have to get a GED. In my state, once I've completed their homeschooling, I can write the diploma, and it counts as a diploma. It's not issued by the state; it's issued by me, but it counts. So I have had parents ask, well, what do you do as far as college goes? And it's very simple. As I mentioned, 2 of my kids have already been in college without a diploma. They didn't even submit a transcript to the state college. But for what you're going to want to do, if there's a specific university that your child wants to go to, if they want to go to a university, what you're going to do is contact the admissions of that university and find out what the expectations and requirements are. Mention to them, look, my kids homeschool. What would they need as a homeschooler to get into college? My friends, homeschoolers get into college all the time. As a matter of fact, there's many universities that prefer homeschool kids and like homeschool kids because the homeschool kids are used to independent learning and do really, really well because they don't need to be coddled, which is kind of cool. So if you're looking at like, oh my gosh, I want my kids to go to college and how will this work? Contact the universities that you are interested in or that your children might be interested in and find out what the requirements are to get into their university. And then if they say, well, we expect these certain classes, then you make sure you get curriculums for those certain classes. The other thing that you can start doing is once they hit 9th grade, but even my daughter took some classes that were 9th and 10th grade level in 8th grade, you're going to start putting together a transcript. And my friends, it's not hard. You start writing together, putting down on paper everything that they do. That includes going to museums, and you put that under, like if they're going to museums and they're studying art, then you're going to put that under perhaps art. My daughter read 17 Shakespeare plays when she was 13. She loves Shakespeare. She read 17 all the way through and then analyzed 2 of them. And I counted that as a credit for English, right? It's a literature credit. She read 17 Shakespeare plays, which is more than I think people do even in college. I mean, certainly more than I did. And I was a theater major. And so you can put that down on the transcript. Now, kind of the rule with transcripts is they use what's called the Carnegie units, which is 120 hours of into that subject equals 1 credit. Okay. If your child is taking college classes at a local community college or a state college, kind of the general rule is 3 to 5 credit hour classes equal 1 high school credit. So, for example, My son and daughter each took English Composition 1 in the fall and then English Composition 2 in the spring. And each of those counted as 1 credit, and each were worth 3 credits. So they earned 6 college credits and 2 high school credits because each class counted as 1 credit. So that's kind of the rule of thumb if your child is already taking college level classes. But again, it's pretty lenient with a lot of people. And so you can start creating their transcripts. At first, I thought that was really daunting, but it's not hard. You can do it on an Excel spreadsheet, right? You can do it in Microsoft Word or on Google Docs. You just put together the transcript. And as far as grading goes, well, you're the parent. How do you feel like they did if they expect a grade? I have moved away from grading my kids. If I feel like they put in a lot of effort, I just put it down accordingly that they just got A's because they put the effort in. Again, we're going to talk about grading in the future because I used to be really concerned about grades. Now I'm not as concerned about grades. I'm more concerned with, are they learning the subject? Is there mastery? Are they interested in it? And things like that, because that's where actual learning comes in. So some states require you to submit lesson plans. And so look at what the state requirements are in your state. There's not a lot of states that require them, but there's a few that require you submit lesson plans for the semester, kind of an outline. My suggestion is find other homeschooling parents in your state and find out what they do. And then you do the bare minimum. Okay. I see parents get really overwhelmed going, oh, I have to be very, very specific about this and that and the other, when they really don't. And they're doing more work than they really need to. And that focus needs to be on, how do I help my child learn the best? Not, am I going overboard with jumping through hoops? Don't worry about going overboard. Just do the very basics that your state requires, and that should be good enough. If you do have legal questions as a homeschooler, I joined the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, HSLDA. Apparently, there's some people who don't like HSLDA. They've been great for me when I've had legal homeschooling questions. I've been able to talk to an attorney from my state and ask direct questions of the attorney and said, what about this and what about that? And there's a fee per year. You don't have to. I know lots of parents who don't join the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, or they join another association, or they don't join anything, and they've done just fine. So find out about the requirements of your state. Again, you can go to the website, schooltohomeschool.com, and then click on the homeschool laws by state. You can find it there, and it'll take you to the U.S. Department of Education, and then it'll take you to what your state laws and requirements are from there. Again, the website that I take you to is the U.S. Department of Education. So that you can find out legally, it's right in front of you from the government themselves. So there's that. But again, transcripts, not hard to put together. And many universities, that's all they require is transcripts. Sometimes it's hard to see what the laws and expectations are for graduation requirements and things. In my state, it's buried deep in the website, and it took me forever to find what their expected requirements are. And one of the things that I found was fascinating was I thought that, my kids have to take algebra 1, algebra 2, trig, geometry, only to find out that per the state's requirements, I am supposed to teach them math. That's what it says. Math, English, social studies, government, the Constitution regularly, which kind of cracks me up because they don't really learn the Constitution that much in public school, but that's still one of the requirements. English, it's very science. It's really generic. And so as I've looked at different states, I'm like, wow, the expectations are actually really generic, which gives you as a parent quite a bit of freedom. Again, there's some states, especially if you're back east in the upper northeast, there's some states in there that are very, very particular with homeschoolers. And so you've got to jump through a lot of hoops, and I'm sorry for that. It is what it is. But so follow the state laws and go on Facebook pages and ask other parents that are in those areas, hey, I'm trying to do this. What should I do about this and that and the other? Or you can contact your Department of Education and say, I just want to clarify what I need to do to homeschool. But again, you can create transcripts for your kids, and starting 8th, 9th grade, start creating those transcripts with everything that they do. Everything counts as learning, so count it all. And then just figure out, okay, they read 10 novels. Let's chalk that up to a literature class. And we've discussed it as a family. So there's some amount of flexibility with the transcripts there. The other thing that I do is when I first started in my state, you're required to homeschool a minimum of 4 hours a day for 172 days. And I have to submit a notice of intent if I go that route to a school district of my choice. And at first I called a friend and I'm like, okay, so does that 4 hours mean I have to do specific book work with the kids? Or does that what does that look like? And what does that mean? And she's like, no. Think about it. You just have to have that time allotted for homeschooling. She goes, but for us, everything counts as homeschool. I mean, if they're out studying nature and things like that, or if they're out playing outside, we actually count that as PE because they're getting that exercise outside, right? She goes, but if you think about it, in the public school, how much time is actually wasted? How much time is actually spent per class? And I was like, well, let's see. In my kids' old school, in the middle school, they'd go in and they had, 45-minute class periods, and then they had, a block scheduling. Actually, it was in the high school. I'm trying to remember because I've had kids in both middle school and high school, and elementary. But I thought, okay, so they've got their passing period 10 minutes, and then by the time you get the kids in, it takes them about 10 minutes to settle down. And then you get into the subject, and so they might teach for 10, 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes, and then they have the kids work on stuff often. This is the generalization of a lot of classes. And then the kids work on stuff and answer questions, but the actual learning time is only 10 or 15, 20 minutes tops, right? That's the actual learning time between all the transitions. And then at the end, they have to get their book bags together and get stuff ready to go. And so because there's so much time spent in transitioning from class to class or from, one thought to another, there's actually not of learning time that actually happens. And so technically, even though there's 45 minutes of a class period, only 20 minutes is spent learning. But yet they allot the 45 minutes. And so my friend said, look, and this is, again, my first year of homeschooling. She's like, so you might say, okay, we're going to work on these. We've got 4 hours allotted for your quote book work. Again, this is when I'm still using curriculums. And yet if they got done in 2 hours, then wow, great. They got their stuff done in 2 hours. Now they can work on some other stuff, which is still learning. The crazy thing is when we started, and my son did want to continue doing algebra, because when I was like, oh no, we're going to deschool now. We're going to do a little bit of math. And he's like, I actually would like to continue with my algebra so I can knock it out. His first day doing algebra all the way through, this is after the piano tuner incident and the meltdown and the mutiny that we had. He went in, he's like, I'm going to do it in this other room. And I said, great. He takes his book. I had bought a curriculum. It was half online, half I had an actual text for him. And there's all sorts of different curriculums you can get. We'll talk about curriculums in another episode. But in this case, it was a book, and then he went online as well. So we went into a different room, and he came out 45 minutes later. And he's like, holy cow, Mom, I just went through 3 full chapters. I'm like, way to go. He's like, it took me 15 minutes per chapter. I'm like, that's awesome. And he's like, no, Mom, you don't understand. If I was in public school, this would have taken us a month to get through, at least. And I just did it in 45 minutes. And I was like, yeah, welcome to homeschool. When they're allowed to work at their own pace, you'll find that oftentimes in certain subjects, they're going to go a lot faster than they would if they were in public school, because they are not being held back by the teacher or by arbitrary expectations or by other students. And in other cases, they might need to take something slower. My daughter happens to not love math, and so it would take her a lot longer on chapters than my son, who goes very quickly through math, but he's slower in learning language arts type of things. And so he would take a little bit longer in some of those subjects, whereas she just zipped through all of the language arts stuff. And we had the capability to go slower on certain subject, like on certain units for her than necessary. I finally got to the point where I'm like, you guys don't really need Algebra 2. And when they started the state college and they took the Accuplacer test for the state college, they're like, yeah, they don't need, he might benefit from Algebra 2, but it's not necessary for him to start taking college level algebra. He already passed to take it. And so he's ready for college level algebra. And they told my daughter, they're like, with her major, she's got all the math she needs. Like she passed out of everything, she's tested out of everything, and she doesn't really need to take any more math classes except for perhaps a financial literacy class. So the interesting thing is my daughter has never finished algebra. She's never taken geometry. She's never taken Algebra 2, and she hasn't really needed it. But yet she's learned the principles in algebra that she's needed as she started working in some design work and different things. As I mentioned, she really wants to fix and flip homes, which is something that she'll be starting here soon. But as she started working on design and she's building a dollhouse right now, she's definitely used algebra, but she's used it as she's needed it. And so it kind of switched my perspective of like, well, do they actually need to take, geometry, or can we just learn certain principles of geometry and that's enough? I feel like we spend way too much on information that we do not need to use, replacing information that is very valuable by wasting time on stuff that we don't need. My kids right now, I actually have a curriculum. I bought the Dave Ramsey homeschool curriculum for teenagers and for high school students, and they're going through that. And 2 of their public school friends are going through it with them. They come over, they go through the curriculum with them. And so they started that last week, and they've got their workbook and they're going through the curriculum. And I actually wanted a curriculum in that case to teach them financial literacy on top of what my husband and I teach them. I think it's interesting that we don't teach taxes and important things in our schools, but yet they're required to take Algebra 2. One is very relevant on a regular basis. The other one may or may not be relevant depending on what they want to be when they grow up. And if they want to be an engineer, sure, it's relevant. But if they want to fix and flip houses, Algebra 2 is probably not the most important thing. But by golly, financial literacy and math of money is incredibly important. And that's important for everybody. But we don't cover it in the public schools. Some schools are starting to require it, but not all of them. But by golly, they all require algebra. They all require geometry. And let me tell you, the last time I ever had to do a proof, it was in 10th grade when I took geometry. That's the last time. And so the cool thing is, as they're going, you can count, going full circle here, you can count that time. Even if they zip through it, the time was allotted, they got their stuff done faster or slower than you needed, and it counts. But again, everything can start to count as schooling. In my state, one of the things when I was in public school that really bothered me as a parent was my son that graduated in 2020, had to take an extra PE class because he was short PE credits. But yet, he would practice football every day for 3 hours because he was on the football team, and he practiced every day after school for 3 hours. And then on Saturdays, he had his games, and that didn't count towards PE credits at all. And in many states, that's the case where they're like, well, if you play sports or even extracurricular sports or community sports or club sports, those don't count for PE credits. Even though they're actually getting exercise, they're learning legitimate skills, those don't count. But your child dressing out and then learning to play tennis for 5 minutes, or learning to bowl for 5 minutes, or running for 10 minutes, and then dressing, back into their regular clothes, that counts for half a credit, which is absolutely the dumbest thing on the planet. So the cool thing is when you start homeschooling, all of those extracurricular things count as schooling. So my daughter and my son take tennis lessons. They're both into racket sports, and those tennis lessons count. And anytime they practice their tennis, that counts as a PE credit. That counts as physical education because it is, because they're running, because they're actually they're getting more physical and that more physical input to their bodies and that stimulus than they would sitting in chairs for 8 hours a day as a public school student. So that's the coolest thing. Again, when we go to museums, when my kids start to study things on their own, like coding or different things, all of that counts as learning, and you can put all of it on their transcripts. They go to dance classes, they go to gymnastics. All of it counts on their transcript. All of it. If they're reading books, if they're writing anything, all of it counts. And you can include it in their transcript. That's the cool thing and part of the freedom that comes from homeschooling. Okay, let's talk about planning from behind, because many states require that you have an attendance log and you record what they've learned from what they're going to learn or what they're going to learn each day. Some states require that you submit that ahead of time. Like this is the overview of what is expected. My state does not, but they do have that caveat that they can come and ask for, what have they learned? And so Julie Bogart, who's kind of a homeschool guru, she homeschooled her 5 kids, and now she runs what's called the Brave Writer, which is a great writing program. If you do look into a writing curriculum, it's a great one. And she coined this term, planning from behind, which is what we started doing because I'm not as organized as a lot of moms. I have friends who are super detailed and organized, and they'll plan out their child's day, for hours at a time, which they've had a few kids that have rebelled, but they'll plan out in great detail everything the child's going to learn. That's not my personality. That actually brings me a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress. I have a general idea, like each week I'm like, I kind of think we want to cover these things, in the things that I for sure want to teach them. But then beyond that, they're going to want to work on these different things. And so planning from behind is when you write down everything that they did that day at the end of the day. So I bought a calendar and I divided it up, and it's one that, it has per day. And for each child at the end of the day, I write, they worked on this. Joshua worked on piano for 2 hours. He worked on this. He worked on this. He did editing on Premiere Pro. He did some business math. He did this. And then I go through with each child and write what they did for the day, really brief, just jotted bullet points, and that counts. And so I have this record at the end of the year of everything that they've done, just looking back. And that's called planning from behind. And all you have to do is take a calendar and then jot down what they've done each day at the end of the day. Some days I got behind, and then a few days would pass. I'm like, oh, I haven't jotted it down. And so I kind of quickly remember, what did we do this week? Jot it down quickly, and it counts. We went to a living history museum. We went to the Rockledge Ranch. We visited, the Glen Erie Castle, or whatever it is. We visited this museum. Kara worked on phonics. She worked on this curriculum, or she worked on engineering and built something out of boxes, right? You can write all of that stuff down, especially with the littles. All of it counts. All of it counts. And so that's called planning from behind, where you just write down what you are going to do. Now, in the future, we're going to talk about like planning like your year and really the things that you as a mom want to get across to your kids and teach your children. But for now, know that depending on your state, you may not have to plan out the whole year. You may not have to plan out everything. Now, the other thing that I want to touch today before we close up, because again, this today is more of a technical day. A lot of parents get worried about, what if my child is not at grade level? That was something I was really, really concerned about at the beginning is, well, they need to be at grade level. They need at least grade level. When they took the CAT test at the end of their first year of homeschooling, I was shocked because I thought, well, they might be a little bit behind because I didn't do great and I really messed up and I wasn't a great homeschool mom and we moved towards unschooling and all the things. At the time, 13, they had turned 13 and 14. 14-year-olds were, when they tested with the CAT test, they tested at college level in reading, writing, and math. And my third grade son tested 11th grade level in reading, writing, and math, which shocked me. And so I thought, okay, maybe I'm not doing as terrible as I thought I would. But I've always been concerned I was always like, oh, but are they at grade level? They are at least at grade level. Until I realized that the grade level thing is totally arbitrary. Remember how last week we talked about how the school system was set up? One of the things that was done to ensure some amount of confusion for students was dividing them up by age, which naturally didn't happen before. In the one-room schoolhouses, kids would go and they'd be all different age. Think about Anne of Green Gables, right? They're all different ages in the same classroom, and they move along at the pace that they move along at with each child. And sometimes they'd have to work a little bit more with the younger kids, and and then we get this, turn it into the 20th century where they start dividing kids up by ages. That was done very intentionally, very purposefully to cause some amount of confusion to the child. Again, read John Taylor Gatto's work. He goes more into that. But what happens is suddenly kids can't get ahead or behind their age, which is not natural. When you think about the workplace, how many workplaces do you go to where everybody is exactly the same age, right? It doesn't exist. It doesn't happen. Even when you get into university or colleges, my kids were in college with a 46-year-old. I'm 46. Like there was people in their class that were my age. And there was people in their class that were in their 20s and in their 30s. And there was other teenagers, So we worry about are they at grade level? Are they at the age that they're supposed to be? And frankly, it's arbitrary and it doesn't matter. Kids are going to learn at the pace that they're going to learn things at. And they're going to learn things based on their interest level. Even as adults, we learn things when we are interested in that subject. Nothing will stop us from learning that thing if we really want to learn about it, period. And if we don't want to learn something and we're forced to learn it, I was working for a company a while back and I had to go through all of this training, and I went through the training. I was bored stiff. I had to learn it because I had to have it. I was bored stiff. I checked that box and I was done. And I honestly couldn't tell you half of what I learned because I just did it to check a box, which is what our kids do every day in public school. They check the box and then they forget it. So I want you to forget about worrying about are they at grade level? You worry about taking care of their needs and helping them love to learn. That's your objective, is you establish a strong relationship with that child, a strong bond, a strong connection, because you want them to be parent-oriented, as we discussed early on. And then you want them to help them to love learning. Your goal as a parent is to help them to love learning and find how to learn and how to find answers to questions. That's where real power comes from. Have you ever noticed there's not very many things in this life that require us to memorize information other than we need to know the driving laws, right? Yeah, we should be tested in driving laws, but otherwise, if we need to know some information, we are not cut off from knowing that information and having to remember it. We have resources to look things up. We are not in this one big test where we're expected to have everything memorized. Our children need to learn those principles. How do we find the answers to questions? If we have a question, where do we find the resources to find the answers? That's where power comes in, is when we teach children really, how do you learn? How do you learn something? How do you look something up? How do you find the answer to your questions? Because they're not going to be able to memorize everything forever. So coming back full circle to the grade level, there's going to be some things that your kids are really going to excel at, and they'd be way above grade level, quote unquote, and other things that they're going to struggle with. And you get to help them along at their pace, which is a beautiful thing. And eventually you get to the point where you're not as concerned about, but are they exactly where they need to be at grade level? One other thought is when a child takes the test, because somebody said, well, what if my son is really behind in reading and phonics and he struggles with reading and he gets below the expected level on the test that the state expects, which very rarely happens with homeschooling families, by the way, so that you know. If the family isn't doing anything, yeah, that might happen. But most parents, because they read to their kids every day, their kids do pretty stinking well in literature and math and things like that. But it happens. It does happen. And I asked the question back. This one parent asked me that. Well, what if my son gets really, really behind? I said, well, what happens in public school if they get really behind? And they said, well, they put them on a plan to keep learning. I said, right. Sometimes they hold them back. Not usually anymore, thanks to No Child Left Behind. But sometimes they will hold them back. But otherwise, they just shuffle them along to the next grade and say, here, this kid struggles with this. Let's put them in a lower reading class or a lower math class or whatever. And then the child's stigmatized anyway, And we have this huge number of kids coming out of school, even not reading, graduating from high school, not being able to do math, and they just shuffle them along anyway. But at least when they're at home, you get to help them one-on-one. And so worry less about that. Worry less about grade levels. Again, I say that and I know you're going to worry because I did, even though people tell me that. They're like, so, don't worry about grade level. And I'm like, no, but I am. What if they're not a grade? Eventually, like the longer you do it, the less you'll worry about, are they at grade level, because they'll end up being higher anyway. I had a friend who put her son back into public school. He was way behind when he was in public school, according to their tests and matrix and all of the things. She homeschooled for 2 years, put him back in, and he was 3 grade levels ahead. And she and I have even talked, and she's like, I'm thinking I might just want to withdraw him because he was doing so much better at home and he seems to be stifled every time I put him back into school. So there we are, my friends. Now, again, you got this. Go look up your state laws and go from there. The scariest part for you is going to be actually withdrawing them. That was the scariest part for me. It's all pretty terrifying at the beginning, but it's a lot easier than it seems. And so look for help on, there's resources on Facebook as far as other parent groups and Facebook groups and different things. Call your Department of Education if you have questions. You could even call the school district. Most school districts poo-poo homeschooling because they don't get the money for those kids. Remember, it all goes back to the mighty dollar. But there are resources for you to find like what you're going to need to do. And there's tons of parents to ask and resources out there to help you along so that you can be successful. So with that, my friends, go do amazing things with your kids. Have a great time with them. And let's start the journey officially. Look at the laws and let's get going. You got this. Thank you so much for listening. And if you like this podcast, please be sure to sign up for our weekly newsletter at schooltohomeschool.com. That's schooltohomeschool.com. Join our private Facebook group, School to Homeschool, and follow me on Instagram, Shanae.Daniels.